I don't think that the fight in the future is going to be about humans versus machines. It's going to be humans who don't know how to work with the technology versus humans who do. And so I think we all have a personal responsibility. I can literally learn about anything now, and I can learn about it on TikTok if I want. I can learn about it on YouTube. I can hear something and I can think, oh, that's interesting. And I can go and teach myself about it.
Maz, welcome to our Change Shift Happens. Thank you for joining us. So today, Maz is highly experienced, and we'll probably get into that in a little moment, but across financial services, legal, now in health tech, IT director, program director, really focused on transformation. I think certainly speak for Belma and I, super excited to have you here. We should probably say we've done a bit of a dry run. So we met about 6 weeks ago and chatted for about 2.5 hours. And so we should have just put some cameras in the room because that was awesome. So now we have, very much looking forward to getting into it. So I asked this question to everyone as a kickoff. When you were 14, 15, 16, in the careers office at school, did you write, I want to be the transformation director in my career?
Absolutely not.
Super. It's going to be a good podcast. How did it happen?
We'll start a little bit later than that, because I think I went from school to A-levels to university more on a let's avoid making any key decisions about the rest of my life. And it was free education. So I stayed in, had a good A-levels, good degree, did my degree in economics and philosophy. But I remember going to the careers office at university back in the day when all the jobs were in files on the wall. Okay. So you would go and you would plug your likes and dislikes into a computer, and it would feed out a green and white computer print of your 10 top jobs. And then they would go and find the folders on the wall and you could sit and read them. And my top 2 jobs came out as a museum curator and an art gallery manager, both of which, for anyone who knows me, would find ridiculous because I have a small problem with my volume most of the time. I found the careers advice quite unhelpful at the time. I had no aspirations for any role in particular. When I was younger, I'd wanted to be a lawyer, and then I'd done a law A-level, and that put me off because there was too much learning and reading. So I applied for the milk round. I think some other guests have talked about that. It's kind of like a graduate application process. And at the time you could apply for 6 roles in the milk round, and they were quite detailed. Okay. So I applied for 6 with 6 of the big corporates. I got through interview stage to 2, and I got to final assessment on 1 in London, and I didn't get a job. So that kind of felt like, I don't know now what to do. So I did what any self-respecting graduate would do, and I got on a flight to Australia for 12 months. I spent all my money in Australia for 12 months. I came back. I moved back in with my parents, who were obviously not delighted about that. And my dad, with no money, my dad promptly marched me down to the Dole office, as was. And said, well, you need to sign on because you'll need your national insurance contributions. Thank you. So I went down there, and you had to apply for a set number of jobs every week off the board. And my job centre was quite robust. You had to prove you'd applied for 6, and you know, you needed to get a job as quickly as possible. So I basically took the first decent job that looked okay that I'd applied for, which was an admin assistant at the Co-op insurance in Manchester. And when I got there, it was doing admin for their project support office, which was just something I had no concept of a project or what it was, or that this work existed. So I was thrown in doing minutes for meetings and running the risk and issue logs, and then progressed to kind of helping with, they were doing a funeral care rollout at the time. So a lot of the franchises had different branding. So we were putting packs together. And I just loved this work. Like, I was so excited by it. So I persuaded them to give me a permanent role, which they did, which I did for 6 months. And then a graduate trainee role came up in Leeds with a software development company. And they were looking for 6 graduates with a view to taking them on. And then there would be 6 roles in the business after an 18-month induction of moving around. And one of the roles was in implementation services, which was on site client implementations of their software. They made software for banks and building societies, so mortgage, credit, savings software. So I went for that, got that, was hanging my hat on this professional services role, which I duly got. So did 18 months induction, got the role, started in the projects team, and we were at the time doing a tender for a major high street bank for a new mortgage platform. It was bigger than anything they'd ever had before.
Yeah.
So all hands on deck, and we won it.
Wow.
So I ended up, my first 3 years as a project manager was on site implementing a group mortgage platform for one of the UK's leading high street multi-brand
What great experience.
banks. So it was, I really cut my teeth quickly. But yeah, I loved it. So that's how I ended up in projects. So just a total chance role.
What I love about that story is that you didn't, things weren't working out and you didn't really know what to do, and you just sort of just did what came next. You just took that next available step, and then things just unfolded for you, which it's hard to believe that things weren't meant to be that way if.
And I think actually one of the things, reflecting, ready to talk to you guys today, I think that's quite a theme that goes all through my career. So it's never really been planned. My moves have really been sort of almost opportunistically taking that next thing that presents itself that sounds like it's going to be a good learning opportunity, or working with people that I like, or something exciting that I've not done before. So I bet people still describe you as being ambitious though, because I feel very similar to you in the sense that, I've taken a role and then that's led to something else, and people always say, oh, you're very ambitious. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I think that's a compliment. But I think when you are driven by learning development, which I think it sounds like you are, you do tend to put your hand up for the opportunity when it comes up, or at least you get yourself ready for that. Yeah.
So kind of along that vein, it would be good to know, or good to understand, how do you develop yourself? Can you remember a time when in your career you thought, I have this set of skills, but I don't have this set of skills, and I need to transform myself into, an individual that would go for, or be able to go for that type of role?
I would say 2 key points, really. The first was my first transition from a delivery role into a team leadership role. So moving from program manager to head of change. And I'd built quite a strong reputation as a really delivery-focused program manager. I was laser-focused on delivery. I was known for getting the job done. We were in a matrix environment, so my assumptions were individuals had their line, their development, their pastoral support elsewhere. My role was focused on making sure that the outcomes were achieved on the project and the right skills were on the project or the program to deliver. And when I first moved into a team leader role, I took that delivery mindset with me.
Yeah.
It didn't work. It didn't work. And actually, I found that I didn't have the skills to fix that.
Yeah.
I didn't really understand how to have conversations with individuals about what they needed from me and how they wanted me to manage. I didn't have the understanding to work with all these different personalities and people with different styles of working and different desires around their ambitions. So it was quite a tricky period for me, actually. There were relationships at that time that didn't go particularly well. I took some leadership coaching at that time, which was really helpful, and some mentoring from other senior leaders in the business, because I think that's a gap probably we don't necessarily develop people into. I think now, but maybe 20 years ago, it was less recognised as a core skill, and something that needed to be developed. And you do have a lot. I've seen people who are real naturals at it, but there are some of us who have had to really work at that. So I would say that was the first part, which was a really steep learning curve for me. And I think my development in that area has lasted over a decade.
Yeah.
Something I still work on every day, but I do feel, the last 4 or 5 years, I've really I feel much more natural
Yeah.
in a people leadership role. And I see that as my primary role now rather than delivery. I think the second real step change for me was moving from that kind of role into my first executive role.
Okay.
And I moved companies when I did that. So I was in a brand new company and it was my first time on an executive team. And you go from being a functional specialist who's really highly regarded for your expertise and the person people go to having to be this generalist with a view, a horizontal slice across the business and only one tiny slice of the piece of expertise that sits around the table. And I had massive imposter syndrome for about 12 months. Yeah, I had huge imposter syndrome. I did a lot of listening. I spoke only when I felt really confident that I had something to say in the early days. I asked a lot of questions. Over time, I mean, I think with anything, over time, you become much more comfortable with that. But it's a real change in how you work. And I think you go from seeing personal expertise as a driver of success to actually recognizing that when you sit on an executive team, things like creating alignment are drivers of success.
Yes.
You know, and recognizing that you don't have all the expertise and actually the strength is the expertise that's around the table and you tap into everybody. So that was probably my second real.
I think creating alignment, I really like that because I've not heard it being put in that way before. I think that's such a lovely way of saying it. Prime example of sort of what got you here won't get you there. But it seems like your progression from being, you know, an excellent delivery person to being a people lead to then being it feels, to me anyway, as I'm listening to it, it feels natural because you needed the listening skills in order to be able to sit at that kind of executive level and absorb as much as possible. And, you know, as a delivery person, you're just busy delivering much, you know, there is listening in that, but, you know, it's probably heightened at that other level.
So I've got a couple of things here. So we heard this recently. Before this person became a CEO, they were given some advice they needed to go and understand the different businesses because you can't sit on a senior leadership team, or this person didn't. But to your point, sit on the exec. If you don't understand what's driving procurement, if you don't understand what the HR director's motives are, if you don't understand a basic version of a P&L to speak to the CFO and the business drivers, when you got to that executive team, are there things that you'd done previously by happenstance or that you'd sought out to build those? And maybe you said you didn't feel as confident, so on day one go in and say, well, I've looked at this line and actually if we do this, we can change things, but that gave you some confidence in the room, or vice versa, if you hadn't done that, would you have done that sooner?
There was nothing specific. I think by virtue of working in a change and transformation role, and especially for myself when I've worked in medium-sized enterprises, you work right across the business anyway. So even though I didn't have any detailed knowledge of finance or detailed knowledge of marketing or sales, I had worked on projects with all those areas. So I felt reasonably comfortable that I had a broad brush understanding of all the components of a business and all the aspects of running a business. But no, I didn't have any specific. Yeah, and I didn't do any preparation really because it's, as similar to how I was saying earlier, a lot of my moves have been quite opportunistic, and this was also one of those moves through a contact. So it didn't really give much time for prep.
And then I was thinking about it on the other side. So when you're now looking at promoting leaders to senior roles within your teams, I was at an event recently and it was a software engineering event. And often they found that the principal engineers were being promoted to team leads. And I think this is quite a common thing, particularly in that kind of area, where the principal engineers were becoming team leads. And in some of these organizations running fairly big teams, technically incredibly capable, but to use your word, the pastoral element or the emotional intelligence perhaps wasn't as high as the quota wasn't as high as it could have been. I guess either how are you helping people in your team who you know could be great to maybe flex those muscles as well, or train those muscles? And what's your view on that in terms of individual contributors, really strong individual contributors becoming senior leaders?
There's a really key point about understanding all the different personalities and skills that you have in your team and also their aspirations. I think earlier in my career, I definitely had a view that progression was always linear. And that, you know, if you had ambition, you would be looking constantly to move up. And actually, playing to a point you made earlier, Will, I've made some sideways moves. I've made some opportunistic moves. Sometimes I've stepped into roles temporarily, like marketing director or facilities director, because there was a gap that I've done alongside my role that have given me actually new skills and new understanding, but haven't formed part of my role and wouldn't be something that I would want to do going forward. And they've given me real progression and that hasn't been linear. And I think now I would actively seek roles that have an interest in learning and development rather than necessarily always a next level up. At that time, I would have put that same lens on any team that I had, which is, if you didn't display aspirations to develop and progress upwards, I would have seen that as low ambition. Whereas now, I think you have to recognise that roles aren't like that anymore, and people can progress technically without limits. They can progress horizontally without limits. But also, I think one of the big things for me has been, I've got people in my team who just want to come in every day and do a really good job. And that's an ambition in itself. That should be completely celebrated. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily always stand by. There's always been a danger that for somebody who is exceptionally good at the job that they do, they get promoted to the next level up, and they get promoted because they're exceptionally good at the job they do. And probably because they have ambition and they view progress as linear. Yeah. That's how I get recognition. That's how I get more additional salary, more benefits. If we're going to do that, we need to make sure that we appropriately skill them for that role. Yeah. And make sure that they understand that that is the role that they actually want. Exactly. Yeah. If you'd have asked me in my first team leadership role if I was enjoying being a team leader, I'd have said I would have said no. And I would have said I'd like to just go back probably to program management. Now I'm really glad that I stuck that out, and it's a skill that I believe absolutely can be learned. It can be taught, can be coached, can be learned. And there's a huge amount of satisfaction in getting better at that. But I don't think we should promote by default people who are technically good, but if they want to be, then we should help them understand the differences. I think that's the key point here. Well, certainly for me, do you understand the expectations of that role that you think? Because yes, maybe it has some extra pension contribution, or yes, maybe it has a slightly more senior status quo within the organisation and perceived level of influence. But and actually those things can be true, but it also comes with that XYZ responsibility, demand, personal responsibility, emotional responsibility. You're going to have, particularly I think in that software space where you've become a principal engineer or you become a delivery director who's still very much focused on, as you said, the program at hand. Well, there's going to be 5 extra meetings a week, possibly an hour a day, where you're not going to be doing what you fundamentally love. Are those tools that you want to skill up in, or do you want to carry on doing this? Yeah, so I think there is that concept, isn't it, that we are all always promoted to a point of incompetence and then you skill up when you're at that level. And it kind of contradicts the idea that you have to be doing the job for a while in order to qualify for promotion, in order for your superiors to say, oh, that person can do the job. So it kind of doesn't, it's a bit of a paradox really. But on the point of skills, if somebody wanted to go get into the kind of transformation role, whether they take the route that you did or, whether they take a different route, what would you say are kind of the core skills for a transformation role? Yeah. Assuming that to be talking about a transformation role, you've already sort of honed the kind of delivery level critical skills, like, you have to be organised. You have to even be able to sort of structure work and ideas logically, those kind of things. I would say the key things for a transformation role, I think you have to be good with energy. You need to bring energy. I think that's a natural point rather than a skill, but I think you do. That's a key part of it. You have to be a clear communicator. And one of the things actually that I've learned as I've progressed is, again, going back to my early career, I would say I had a one style of communication, very factual, very logical. And as you progress and you get more experience with people, you understand that you have to have lots of different communication styles and you have to understand what works for all the different situations. I think it helps if you're quite creative. You get different types of program and senior change lead, and they fit in different organizations and different roles. You have people who are really strong on methodology and who view the role as ensuring that the methodology is appropriately implemented, which gives the control and the structure, and that is a really key skill in those kind of environments. And then in some of the more flexible environments, I think you get people and this is the category I would put myself in, which is kind of a little bit fly, we'll say sometimes. So I know the methodology. One of the reasons I like working with small businesses is because it's a much more pragmatic application of the methodology, and we don't necessarily always have the resources and the tools. So you have to be quite creative and you have to be a good problem solver.
Yeah. On the communication styles, I find that point very interesting, and I think some people who listen to this or watch it will find it really interesting as well. So you mentioned there's different styles. What are they?
I mean, I wouldn't be able to list a list of communication styles, I'm afraid, Velma, but I think, I've worked with people who, as I said, for me, my natural style is very factual and logical. And actually, I wouldn't have understood why people weren't necessarily understanding what I was saying, because in my way, I was just communicating very clearly and logically, and the answer was apparent. You have people who need to absorb, need to hear and then take away and absorb and come back and reflect on things. I know people who handle communication best in bite-sized chunks. So if I was to go to them and say, and I want to talk to you about 10 things, that's not going to produce a good response or an output. So I'm going to say, today we're going to talk about this one thing, and then tomorrow we'll talk about something else. So I think what I meant is, when I said it, is it's less about there being a set of communication styles and more about understanding how people
absorb information.
And it's the same in different organizations as well. I've worked in organizations where the general culture is a real thirst for detailed information. So if you were doing a project or a program communication, the desire of the audience would be, we actually want to know all the detail. Whereas I've worked in other organizations where it works when it's more visual and high level and more fun, and then that's the way that lands. So I think understanding at individual levels, team levels, organization levels is really important.
Yeah, that's really clear. I like that.
We're going to start getting to culture here, but before I do, I wonder if we can maybe set the scene of some transformations that you've been involved in. So, top question: what's the most, when you look back, are there some programs and projects that you've been involved in that make you really proud, that you've learned lots from, that you go, wow, that was a big one when we signed that off, when we put that into production, or when we delivered that?
Yes.
Good.
I'm going to use two for two different reasons again. So, and they were both in the same place, actually. They're both part of the same transformation. But in my last role, it was a 3-year transformation that turned into a 5-year transformation. But it was a whole of business transformation. It started off as when I joined, it was at a point that we were having a turnover of the executive team, refocus on strategic objectives. The business had posted a loss. There needed to be a route back to profit over the next 3 years, building a new executive team or supplementing the existing executive team to do that. So it was a really exciting time to join, but with some really strong objectives that were required. And over the next 3 to 5 years, we touched every part of the business. So, we looked at technology, we looked at culture, we looked at the target operating model, we looked at the business model, we looked at how we communicated with customers. So it was really nice in terms of it being a holistic piece of work. And certainly it's the only time that I have been in one organisation and been able to work on every aspect of that organisation and see it transform fully through the entire period. The other one that I want to touch on was a part of that transformation program, but I want to pull it up because of the outcome being stronger than I'd anticipated, which was an office refurbishment.
Okay.
So we had 2 offices, both under capacity, 2 different cities, And we approached it initially. It was a cost exercise. These two offices could be consolidated. That would have a material impact to the bottom line early on in the transformation program. That's how we were approaching it. We selected the office and we ran the refurb. Now, at the time, the new office was going to only had a capacity of 25% under the business headcount, which this was pre-COVID by quite a few years.
Right.
And not really anyone apart from creative industries was playing around with flexible working. So to move forward with this felt quite risky.
Yeah.
So we did laptops, we did hot desking throughout, everyone with laptops.
Okay.
We built collaborative working spaces, phone booths. So things that we see now quite commonplace in office environment, but which felt quite groundbreaking at the time for that type of business. Really bright colours, really open spaces, lots of collaborative work areas. The reason why I wanted to pull it up is because for me, doing that project within that programme was probably the thing that I believe fast-forwarded cultural transformation more than anything else and really set the rest of the programme up to succeed. And I think it was a real lesson in how influential things like physical aspects and space to creating the culture that you want. We obviously chose some of the things we were doing with culture in mind. We wanted to break down silos. So we wanted to create more collaborative workspace. We wanted teams to work with each other. So we did the hot desking. But I think even, things like having the corporate values on the wall and having people talking, you could feel the difference and you could feel it every day from the day that we all moved into the new office. And I think from then, other things were easier because it felt like a catalyst in terms of positioning the business for the future and for cultural change.
So this is the drumbeat we're going to march with. We're obviously a big believer in environment's key. As a startup, you don't base yourself here, right? It's central time, it's expensive. But we believe we want to bring people together. We want to be accessible. We want people to have a nice office environment. Sort of had a look at the co-workers, but I couldn't agree with you more. But so on that, so how did you communicate that? Because now I do know, but obviously the offices at capacity, when you're going to an office that is of a less capacity and you're in a transformation, and whether or not it was communicated, I really don't know, but there's always a sense if the business is outperforming its targets or it's underperforming or there is some cost challenges. To have transformation, possible cost challenges being rumoured, 25% less capacity. How do you manage that communication to keep people together rather than going, well, I've got to be one of the people that's leaving? So
no one left as a result of it because the offices were in different places. There was a consultation to move, but everybody had a role.
Right, okay.
Some people may have chosen that was too far for them to travel.
Yeah.
But we worked to provide support for people travel. There was travel allowances for the first 12 months. There were things like that, buses to the new office. But I think we communicated early and we communicated often and we included people. We were very aware that how unsettling it would be, and you're uprooting 50% of your workforce from one location to another, and you have to answer, well, why this office, why not this office, and all those
people
questions.
Are losing their desks. And I think I remember when we first went from being kind of having a desk and being able to put your biscuits in the in the cupboard, and then
it's like that.
And then all of a sudden they're saying you don't have a desk anymore, and you're like, why not? It was awful.
and these are the things that you realise are really important to people. You can talk to them about the big things, but fundamentally what they're going to be most worried about is what does it mean for my pictures on my desk, or my travel time, or
my chocolate digestives.
We launched very early on like open Q&A sessions, and anyone could submit questions and we would provide answers and we would publish the answers to everybody so everybody could see, and we would publish stats on how many questions we were getting raised on each topic. We would have sort of consultation sessions, not formal consult, but invite staff to come talk to us about things. People don't like change. We know this. At first, they're nervous of it until they understand it and they can see it and touch it and feel it. I don't think the excitement really started building until we could showcase part of the new office. So for the people in the office that were being refurbed, we refurbed it whilst occupied.
Okay.
So we kind of moved everybody onto one floor
Yeah.
and implemented some homework in and refurbed the top 2 floors, and then we moved everybody up. So that you get key points in a project, and moving everybody from the ground floor up, so that you had half the business now working in the new space, that starts to generate excitement. It starts to generate a buzz, and you're inviting people from the other office to come and visit and have a walk around, and people can see it. And it's, you know, and I love that office. I mean, it's a really nice office. So
it's actually quite a lot of foresight to do that before COVID, because obviously then when COVID kicked in, it wasn't such a step change to have people work from home. So on the topic of kind of bringing people along on the journey, change is disruptive, and whatever that change is, whether it's, you know, a new product, a new strategy, whatever it is, we are going to get people who are, you know, all for it straight away. And then we are going to get people who are a little bit hesitant and potentially, you know, find more problems than solutions initially. How do you work with detractors to bring them, you know, on the journey? At what point do you deal with talent in your team? Resistance
is an interesting one, because I think if you reframe resistance as a form of engagement, it's people saying, I'm bothered. Like, they're not saying I'm not bothered. They're not being apathetic. They're having an emotion about it. And if you reframe that, that's actually a really positive thing. You just need to unpack it. So they're either saying, I don't understand it, or I'm aware of risks that you're not aware of, or that nobody's talking about. I can see problems that no one's talking about. So I think the first response to anything like that is to go talk to these people.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time they're the people doing the work. They're the people using the system. Yeah. They're the people, you know, on the ground in the process that you're trying to change. So going, talking to them, really understanding what they're worried about, what their problems are. And I think then trying to break down sort of the big strategic goals and statements into the what does it mean for me every day? Where am I going to put my biscuits? I think is key. So trying to make the change much more personal in terms of answering what their concerns are is the first really important step in resistance. And then I think from then, these are people that you should engage in your change process. You know, keep them involved, keep talking to them, keep showing them things, because I think the other time that people resist is when they feel that then they can't influence a change. Change is going to be done to them, and they have no power to influence it. And there will be change that they can't directly influence, but if they're given a voice and we listen to their concerns and we respond to their concerns to them face to face, then at least they know they've got somewhere they can be heard, and they've been able to put their voice across.
I was just going to say, how much your time in any program is going to be limited, but how much time at the start, when as an exec you've made the decision to change, in your role you know that the people are going to be the proponents of it, the folks who deliver it, and also the obstacles as well. It's very often not the technology, it'll be the people who are doing or not doing it. How much time do you spend doing that communication piece with folks one-on-one?
I mean, it hugely depends on the drivers of the program or the change that you're doing. Sometimes you have more luxury to have that period of conversation and consultation than you do with other changes. I think more importantly than how long you have to do it is when you do it. I think do it early, communicate early about the change you're going to do, and then quickly follow that with taking it down to talk to the people who the change is going to affect. Because if you, like with anything, if you leave a big gap in communication, this is something that I see quite a lot in businesses. Senior leaders will say things when they have things to say. Sometimes when we don't have anything to say, the risk is we don't say anything because we don't have anything to say, so we don't communicate. But then people will fill the gap themselves, and they'll make their own messages. So it's far better to say, we haven't got anything to say. We don't have any update, but you can come and talk to us and ask us questions. So I think communicating early and then communicating regularly is more important than how long you have. But
you would prioritise that to go and spend time with the people. If there are groups, if there are workers, if there's individuals affected, get down and listen to that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't necessarily always do it. I would love to.
No, I'm sorry, but that would be in your world. That would be
absolutely, and that would
a task on that register.
Yeah.
And just going back to the talent question, I like your reframing of detractors. It's actually, these people are actually really bothered. Have you ever been in a situation where people are either not bothered or just they don't want to change? Has that ever happened to you, and how did you deal with that?
I'm sure I have. I'm sure I have.
Just left them in the dust.
Yeah.
I'm off delivering.
I mean, there are always going to be detractors, and there are going to be people who continue to be detractors for valid reasons because the change just simply won't work for them.
Yeah.
And then there will be people who are detractors for other reasons. And I think with the best will in the world, you're probably never going to implement a scale change and everybody be absolutely delighted about it, no matter how much you communicate. I'm not sure there's anything you can do about those individuals on an individual basis. I think the key thing is creating a positive swell around the project. So people have probably talked about, identifying what we call change agents. So people who are positive about the change, and then these are almost like your little moles that are working all over the organisation. And I think if you can have more change agents on the ground than you can have detractors, then it's a natural curve. There will be a tipping point where the noise swell of positivity is far louder. So the detractors will still be there, but that won't be a majority, and that won't be the dialogue and the discourse.
So the office move, in the context of the entire business transformation, office move was a real, I think I said beat the drum, but that significant milestone of engagement, visibility, we are going to do this. What was the overall outcome of the 5-year transformation? How different did the business look? How different did it feel? What were you most proud of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it felt hugely different at the point that I left. I mean, it was a much more efficient organisation than it was when I joined. There'd been some big customer wins. We'd achieved Investors in People Platinum first time, which is really rare. As I said, like the cultural feeling, the collaborative working, just the general buzz around the working for the business, the office. The office was actually nominated for a Best Workplace North award. We didn't win, unfortunately, but it was nominated. We'd launched a digital platform for claims, which had won an award as well. And I think those things, like awards, are important because they create confidence in the people that work there. So it felt like a completely different business, I think.
What was the biggest learnings along the way?
I mean, as I said, that was my first executive role. In that business. So the huge amount of learning in terms of operating at that level, a huge amount of learning in terms of a mindset shift in my view of leadership, and the fact that leadership is really around asking a lot of questions, creating the alignment, and also developing the people, and not necessarily about rolling my delivery head and doing it all.
In your kind of role as the executive, imagine there was a lot of strategy setting as well.
Yes.
How did that feel, going from kind of, getting a strategy and then going, yep, got it, I'll get it done, to actually setting the strategy? How was that shift?
That was a really nice part of the development of my role there, actually, and something that I do now in subsequent roles, and I absolutely love it, which is, as you said, moving from sort of delivery into helping with strategy and now facilitating strategy and strategic thinking. And I think strategic thinking was something that I found really hard in my early career. Because of the focus on execution. So we could talk about strategy, but my brain would always go to, but how are we going to do that? Or that's not good. We're not going to be able to do that easily. So
you have no idea how hard that is.
It was like, I would just go straight into execution mode. So to keep myself out of that, was quite hard. But in the second phase of the transformation, we started looking at, when I joined, I said we had this 3-year program. And then we started looking at the beyond that, and we created again a second 3-year strategy around growing the business, which was when I really got involved in helping facilitate because one of my favorite things is kind of facilitating groups, and especially thinking and ideation sessions. I did my Institute of Directors strategy, which was really useful because it gave me a toolkit of some quite a lot of frameworks that you can use for developing strategic thinking. And we ran a whole series of workshops with the executive team. But one of the things that we designed from scratch was a whole strategic execution framework showing how we would have the annual strategic planning process at executive level, and how that would then translate into departmental annual goals and how they would be measured, tracked, their key KPIs, and then how that would cascade down into department and individual objectives, which is a really nice, clear framework, the objective of which every individual in that business should have an absolutely clear line of sight to how the work they come in to do every day aligns and contributes with the overall goals of the business. We would have quarterly stand-ups with all colleagues, so like all hands, where we would present on progress against. So every year we had 10 strategic objectives across the business. They all had measurable KPIs. Everybody understood them. Everybody would get a quarterly update on how we were progressing against them. So it was really clear. It was really clear, and it's a really nice framework.
Yeah. I'm doing that now as it happens. That's what I was busy doing when you came in. So if we could just kind of change tack slightly. So through your career, you've had twists and turns and, progressions and some sidesteps, etc. What would you say was the most significant personal transformation through that?
I think probably the most significant personal transformation was getting comfortable with leading without needing control.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So stepping back from having my eyes on all the outcomes and being very prescriptive about the how and how things would be done and what the outcomes needed to be, to actually to delivering through people. And recognizing that my role now is to build the teams and create the environment for the people in those teams to do their thing.
Yeah.
And kind of letting go of that is quite... At first, it's quite difficult.
If it's not getting done, it's like, don't worry, I'll do it myself.
Yeah.
It's that sort of, but you kind of can't.
And it's also being trying not to be so prescriptive, trying to stepping back and allowing the people who work for you to show where they can step into and giving them the coaching and the support to do that. And sometimes just maybe it's not going exactly the direction or exactly the way, but you have to have trust that in the teams and trust that they can work that through with support.
I was going to ask about failure on that. So, and I think we're nearly maybe about to touch on it. With your experience, can foresee perhaps that's not going quite the direction that you might have thought, or call it out. It's just not going right. How far do you let it go to fail so that person can learn from that experience versus just turn left? There you go. Yeah. Okay, carry on.
Yeah. And I think you can do that through early stage conversations without letting that happen. But I think it's the way you have those conversations. Yeah. So it's kind of, you can start conversations about where they might be thinking of taking it and then what the implications of that might be. So they can almost be like a development conversation about how things might unfold and then some
scenario 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah, exactly.
How might this?
Yeah. So you're intervening and trying to use it as a coaching conversation rather than allowing them to fail, especially if that's a key outcome that needs to be achieved. Yeah. That wouldn't be good for them and it wouldn't be good for the business. So
interested about your opinion on failure. So I'm guessing in some larger organisations have almost got teams that they just allow to fail to learn. In an SME, and I don't know the ownership structure, that may not be practical.
In terms of the delivery teams and the agile delivery teams, absolutely. Like we foster that environment of it's
Fail
okay, and
quick,
actually
learn.
it's positively celebrated to
Yeah.
fail sometimes. We haven't actually done it, but we've talked about having a failure of the week or a failure of the month.
Yeah.
So where everybody can debate how bad everybody's failures were, and then obviously how good that was for us as a team and all the things that we learned. You know, we actively do it in the context of the agile delivery framework. We've talked about it culturally as a business and in terms of how we get more agile broadly across the business in terms of trying new things.
Yeah.
And I think that is when you really need to think about celebrating failure, because it's a natural byproduct of implementing, more iterative, more agile working.
Yeah.
So at the moment where I am, it's more confined into the delivery space.
Yeah.
But fully celebrated.
Positively.
Absolutely.
A lot of the people that we've interviewed, they have talked about failure as a mechanism for learning.
Yeah.
But I think there is a distinction between culturally, like, oh, it's great to fail, and then promoting a culture of failure versus culture of learning, if that makes sense. And so do you remember a time where you realized that it was actually okay to fail?
I've definitely had personal examples of failure, like small, tiny, everyday, as we all do, but a couple of larger ones, I would say. And I would be very surprised if you had anybody on the podcast who didn't refer to an early stage delivery where they entirely focused on the technical delivery and thought everything was going amazingly and then put it into production and nobody used it. Because actually you had completely blind spotted the need for the people on the journey and the hearts and minds and that. So definitely I've been on that curve. We talked a bit earlier about my first move into people leadership. That was a real learning curve for me, and that was definitely a time that I
thought you failed
quite hard on myself, both in terms of my own frustration with myself at the time, because I felt like I didn't know what tools I needed, and it's like you're not doing a good job, but you don't quite know
why and how to
fix
make it better.
And also I think one of the things that I've learned through experience is sometimes the boldest decision is to just say stop. And there have been instances where I have allowed a program to continue either because I was professionally invested in the outcome or because I felt that the external profile or the pressure was so great that to say, actually, I don't think this is going to work. And I know you may have spent X amount of money and we spent X amount of time, but we need to either stop, pivot, or do something different, which is, it's a gambler's fallacy, isn't it? If you keep putting your money in the slot machine, eventually someday it's going to pay, and that's not how we know that's not how it works. So, I think I've had instances of that, and I've kicked myself afterwards because the suspected situation has come to bear 2 months or 3 months later, and I felt a sense of personal responsibility for not saying, against anybody else's judgment, but me saying I think we should stop. So they've definitely been learnings, and that is something that I'm quite focused on now in terms of saying if there's any point that I feel that we just need to take a pause point and challenge ourselves on whether we're going to achieve what we think we're going to achieve, that I would do that earlier rather than later.
I think that is some really good insight, by the way, because in sort of doing this podcast and then doing some research on transformations, and so 70% of business transformations fail. And when I say that to people say, well, actually, I'm surprised it's that low. I think giving ourselves and other people the space to say, actually, we're not going down the right, we should stop. I think that's a really good point, and I'd love to highlight that.
We did that event in London a couple of weeks now. It was, I'm getting lost here. It was about 2 months ago. 2 months ago. And that was the question, what percentage of transformations fail? I think everyone wrote like 80, 90%. And then someone in the room, I'd like to credit them, but I think it was John, but I can't remember. So, it's got to be 100. What do you mean? Well, has anyone ever delivered on time, on plan, on resource, on just the entirety? We're not, and I just said, even by like 10 grand or 3 days or 1 week or one missed stage, because you failed. Okay, the program was success. And it's got to be 100%. It's got like...
Yeah, and it's a really good point. And I think on the point of failure, just kind of going back to my earlier question. So during those times, when did you sort of sit there? Do you remember a moment where you sat there and thought, I'm being too hard on myself? Everyone goes through this.
Yes, I've been quite self-critical at points in the past. I don't think I've ever really felt that I would be the only person going through that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've been disappointed in my own sort of performance or ability at that point in time.
Right.
But I've never really felt, oh God, it's
just
only me and everybody
really?
else
Okay,
must be and everybody else must be amazing. I do think I've managed to keep quite a sort of pragmatic mindset
Level-head
in terms
about it,
of there must be other people moving into a leadership role for the first time who feel like this, or there must be other people taking on projects who feel like this. Yeah. And I think, we think of failure as the opposite of success, don't we? That's inbuilt in us, and we need to recut that because they're not opposites.
Yeah.
They're
a part of success.
Different.
I think it's just a success is a later phase of failure. I think that's kind of how I see it now.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's really good. So I do have a question here that I don't think we've asked anybody on the pod, but it is part of it's on the questions that we send out, but we've never asked this question before, and I don't know how it's going to go. So as we're talking about kind of, progressing and learning, and that can be quite hard. So how do you manage your mental and emotional well-being during those periods of intense change?
I think I'm quite good at managing that more so now than, again, early stage careers. I think you learn the tools and the things that you need. And I think also you have the experience to recognise that when things seem really bad, they're not actually that bad.
Yeah.
Things will get fixed, whereas, it can be quite emotional, can it, early on when things start to go wrong. And you can take a huge amount of personal pressure and responsibility for that. Whereas I think experience does bring a level of sort of pragmatism and understanding. Level-headedness, perfect word. If you work in transformation and change management delivery, there's always going to be periods where you need to call on a bit of resilience and well-being because it's going to be stressful. For me, I think I focus on three fronts. My physical well-being, I will always make time for the gym or for a run or for a walk because I know that keeps me grounded.
Yeah.
From a mental well-being perspective, I think I found reflection really useful and making sure there's time for that and not being too hard on myself. But also just having something that helps me disconnect from work, even if that's just watching crap TV for an hour before bed. And if it's really stressful, the crapper, the more mundane, the better.
Used to really be into Geordie Shore.
Me
That's
too.
a bit TMI, but
Perfect.
Wow.
And then probably the third one would be socially and just making sure that I make time to see the people that fill me up and make me laugh.
Yeah.
So, and I think, if I get those three things, even in small doses, then...
I knew you were going to have a really good answer to that. And that's why I was like, right, we need to get out there.
And I think it is a brilliant answer. And I think thinking about maybe the two audiences, I think the peer group are going to get that. And I'd be surprised if I hadn't thought about. I think it's more the folks earlier on in their career because look, our job is to speak to lots of people who are in the process of moving roles, and a reasonable proportion of them, it's the emotional toll of the roles that they're in, and maybe particularly in the change transformation space, maybe it's not on plan or it's not going quite to budget, or they're feeling pressure from the business or their stakeholder, and they're taking that quite personally. Very often it's not personal. 90% of the time it's not personal. I think the other thing is that what we hear is that failure is them failing. And that's just it. And there's no recovery. I've got to leave. This isn't going right. And I think actually the slightly more seasoned professional, one, they get that failure is okay, and they go, well, I need to put this right. They're not looking for a new job. They're going, right, we need to roll our sleeves up. Actually, in some cases, this can be a bit of a pivotal moment if we get this back on track. It can be a career maker, which is the flip side of that. But secondly, I think the important thing is stepping away. If you're working 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night for any length of time, sometimes it is needed in those roles, for any length of time, that's not healthy, that's not good. Go and stick the TV on, go outside and get some fresh air. I think we're all quite physically and well-being driven. don't want to prescribe that to people. Go and find out what your thing is. Reading a book, great. Go to the pub, great. Go and watch a game, great. Go and stick the TV on, great. Go to the gym, brilliant. Go and do that for a couple of hours. You will be a different person afterwards. I think that's really important.
When you are going through a period of intense change and you know, things move 100 miles an hour and there's only so much time in the day, those things can slip.
Yeah.
How do you prioritize
those things?
Those things, yeah.
I was going to say I'm lucky. Most people wouldn't think this is lucky, but my natural body clock wakes me up at around 5 to 5:15 every morning.
Okay, yeah.
So the gym is kind of will always happen because I prioritize that first thing in the morning, every morning. That is a part of my routine that happens. And sometimes it, you know, if it's really busy, then it might get cut short to a 40-minute session, but it will always happen. So that's in.
You're non-negotiable.
That's a non-negotiable. Right. And it's so heavily built in my routine now that it will just always happen. Yeah, for people who wake up at like 8:15 and they're really busy, they might find that a bit harder.
Yeah, making a coffee's hard.
Yeah. The reflection thing, the reflection point is definitely a skill that I've built.
Yeah.
Definitely not part of my earlier career. And I think once you understand how important and valuable that is, it just becomes something you habitually build in, you know, and it doesn't have to be a huge amount of time. It can be when you go and make yourself a cup of tea. Yeah. Instead of allowing yourself to be like, oh my God, I'm thinking about that next meeting, or I'm thinking about all the things I've got to do. Actually, I'm just going to take this 5 minutes to look out the window and think, what do I think about this morning? Yeah. What do I think about how that meeting went? You know, what do I think about where I'm at? Yeah. And how I'm showing up today. Yeah. And it can be 5-10 minutes, but you know, you just have to make the time. It's really important.
I think there are loads of studies, especially when it comes to mindfulness, around kind of breaking that sort of, whether it's a negative thought loop or a thought loop. But actually, with breathing exercises, it takes like 30 seconds for your brain to reset itself and not to
keep panicking.
Exactly. I do really, really like that. What's kind of the best piece of advice that you have received throughout your career that you think, actually, let me put that out there in the world because it really helped me?
Ooh, I wouldn't necessarily say it was a piece of advice, but probably it's a takeaway from working with someone, an inspiring mentor who habitually would ask, in the context of whatever we were doing, are we thinking about doing the right thing?
Right.
Are we doing the right thing? And what would the right thing be? And I think that's something now I do with my teams and the businesses I go into. And I think it's a really powerful thing because sometimes you can get caught up in a whole load of drivers and lose sight of, if we just stopped for a minute and said, in all the noise, like how much money we've got, or if it needs to be on Tuesday, or, you know, what that senior person needs, what would be right? And right it can have all the context. You know, I have it with my team a lot of the time in terms of solution architecture. You know, there's pressure on cost, things need to be delivered quickly. You know, some of the solutions, I just want us to be really sure that we're not designing in future complexity because of these external pressures, and we're always asking ourselves, what's the right solution design? Obviously, there's the customer context, you know, the right for the customer, increasing focus on that over the years, but just a really simple way to ask yourself that encompasses thinking about, you know, what they need, colleagues, morals, ethics. Yeah, I think it's just such a simple thing, and it covers everything.
Yeah.
Have you purposefully built a network and a little community of peers that you go to refill the cup, to get ideas, to find inspiration, to share? Is that something that you've purposefully done?
Yeah, I have. I wouldn't say it's a huge network, but I approach it in the similar way that, you know, apparently you don't need more than 3 to 5 really close friends because we don't actually have the capacity for that deep level of connection with more people. And my network is a bit like that. I have a small handful of people who Absolutely, I
You're
would
super,
do that too.
yeah.
If I ever need some advice, I'll just pick up the phone and say, can I just run this by you? Or same as a sound off, this happened today and I'm frustrated. Am I being unreasonable?
Yeah. Oh, that's so valuable. That's so valuable. We are getting to the end, but we haven't touched on future landscape. So what we'd really like to know is kind of what is an upcoming transformation or change that you can see on the horizon that really excites you about the future?
Thinking about transformation and my work, I think that the most exciting things that are happening today or that are happening now is, transformation is no longer about projects and programs. It's about creating a capability in an organization for ongoing adaptability and agility and change. So I think we're almost, if we're not already, I think we're almost at a point where transformation is almost the operating model. It's like business as usual.
Yeah.
It's like technology is significantly driving that, but transformation is now the thing that we have to be able to do every day, and we have to make sure that our skills and our capabilities and our culture can flex to be able to deliver continual value and to be able to respond to how fast, particularly the technology landscape's changing, but also customer needs and expectations, all those kind of things. And I think from a technology perspective, what's really exciting is technology is moving out of the domain of technologists. Yeah. It's everybody's business now. So as a transformation leader, I have to be technology literate. I don't have to be a techie, but I have to be an integrator. I have to be able to understand how to bring all these different technologies together and have them working together and have them working in the organization. So I think they're, for me, the two really exciting things in my role that are happening at the moment. And, the good news is on the technology front, there's information and skills and training has never been more available, and most of it's free or it's low cost. So, I can literally learn about anything now, and I can learn about it on TikTok if I want. I can learn about it on YouTube. I can go on Coursera or Udemy and I can do a short course. So I can just, I can hear something and I can think, oh, that's interesting. And I can go and teach myself about it. Yeah. And the technology is intuitively designed for us to understand it and work with it. So
that is very exciting. It opens up a world of opportunities to everyone, really.
Yeah.
It's almost like technology has given us an ability to have an even keel, to be on an even keel, really, because it's so accessible and so there.
I think you've both answered this question with access and the technology piece. But if you were entering the world of work or early on in your career with that in mind, is there advice, or maybe that you tell your team, is there advice and things you point people towards to accelerate them, to put them on the front foot? We are nearly at the end and we've not mentioned AI and everyone has the fear of it, right? So is we better put it in.
Throw it in there.
Well, if we don't, the algorithm will deprioritize the feed. So
if we don't, we'll break out in hives.
As many times talk about AI.
Right, we mentioned it. But is there stuff with that you go, I'd encourage you to think about or look at to give yourself.
And I'm smiling because it's such a live conversation at the moment at work.
Okay.
In terms of people upskilling themselves and taking personal responsibility for understanding about AI, understanding about automation, understanding the tools that are out there, upskilling themselves. I think learning and professional development is not something that we do twice a decade anymore. 10, 15 years ago, we went on a course every year. We have to do it every day now. And we have to take personal responsibility for it. I don't think that the fight in the future is going to be about humans versus machines. It's going to be humans who don't know how to work with the technology versus humans who do. And so I think we all have a personal responsibility, irrespective of what profession you are in. Yeah. I think you need to be thinking now about how you're going to upskill yourself, how you are going to implement lifelong learning. As I said before, the best thing about this technology is we're always going to need technologists.
Yes.
And so if that's your bag and that's what you want to do, then great. But the new technologies are completely open to people like us to understand and work with. And we're seeing new roles and new opportunities. So yes, AI and automation is going to increasingly take on routine tasks, and they're going to be not just admin, but they're going to be operations roles, they're going to be analytical roles. But we're seeing so many new opportunities get created. And the best thing about the new opportunities is they're not techie roles, but they are at that intersection of technology and these tools and those human characteristics like, creativity or leadership or strategic thinking, and some of the, I love like some of I've seen like some of the roles like a digital ethicist.
Yes,
I saw, and I thought that's how, these are really exciting roles. So I think, I say to my team, go out there, learn stuff, read stuff. We have AI Friday where we all get back together and say, let's spend an hour just interesting stuff that we've learned and things we want to talk about. We're piloting a few tools. It's an interesting time and you've got to do it yourself.
I really like that. And is there any specific tech that just whilst we're on the subject of AI, is there any specific tool or tech that you think, oh, wow, that's so cool? Like for me, for example, I think the NVIDIA robots.
Yeah.
Can't wait to be able to afford a robot who can do all my cleaning. Do you know what I mean? And like they'll never get tired. Brilliant. They can do all the ironing. Excellent. I can't wait for that. Is there anything like that you're super excited about?
Do you know what? My aspirations are far more modest, I think, at this point in time. Like I'm ridiculously excited about the fact that, I've always subscribed to a lot of publications and I like reading articles, but sometimes they're like 200 and 300 pages long. And I have McKinsey and I have other ones like
Gartner,
that. And sometimes they're brilliant. And my life is just so much better now that I can put those articles into ChatGPT or one of the other tools and say, and they know my role now because I use it all the time. So they know, and I can just put these articles in and say, tell me what I need to know. And then I get 1 or 2 pages and I'm like, boom. I've got some real insight. I've got some actionable, this is what it means for you and your role. And these are the things you can think about. So for me, it's the whole idea of, and this is key for everybody, it's how are you going to personally use AI to improve your decision making and your productivity, because it's there and it's already transformational in terms of how you can use it.
It really is.
I think that it's so digestible, like because you can take huge quantities of information, and as you say, in half a page to a page, if it's summarized perfectly in seconds, tailored to who you are and how you may perceive the information over those 300 pages. I used to have it. My job when I first moved to the city in London was summarising regulatory papers. That was when I had to go through my Geordie Shore watching period, because when you read like 3 regulatory documents which are 300 pages long, all you want to do is just switch your brain off. And that would have been super easy because you would just upload them and be like, give me 5 bullet points and then
I'm having the rest of the day off.
Yeah, exactly. That would have been amazing. But on the flip side, I did learn a lot through that because there's a lot of critical thinking, a lot of kind of strategy, thinking through how it's going to impact strategy, etc. So I am worried slightly about how it's going to impact the way that we learn and crunch information for ourselves. But on the productivity front, it's bang on. I
agree with you wholly there. And I've even joked with friends that it's almost like you don't have to think anymore, because it will start, the AI will start you off in your thinking. So it's almost like we run the risk of losing the ability to get started. So we can take an output and we can critique it or tweak it or change it, but we're just staring at a blank sheet of paper and going, don't know where to start.
Have you given ChatGPT a name yet?
No, but she's definitely a she.
Is she? Okay. So I asked ChatGPT what it would like to be called.
Brilliant.
And it came up with the name Ash, and I was like, are you male or female? It said, don't have a gender, but that's why Ash works really well. So I was like, brilliant. So now my ChatGPT is called Ash.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Sorry, on that
note. Right, no. So I'm conscious that it is Friday afternoon.
Yes.
It's about 20 degrees,
it's
23
sunny.
degrees. No, I just, sort of Thank God you didn't get that role, eh? You know, no. The sort of joking aside, I think the way that you entered the world of work is, let's say, refreshing or illuminating. But I think it's both of those things. But it's also, you know, certainly from our perspective, seeing so many people not getting their first role and struggling to break in, and to know that regardless of where you enter and how you enter, that you can get to an executive team in your career is inspirational, and how you've navigated it, I think, has been super insightful. I think the points around individual contributors and training those muscles around EQ and communication and empathy and listening and absorbing, and I took it as like really cognizant of, if you are the delivery person, the temptation to go and deliver the thing when it's no longer your role at a certain stage. The cognitism of recognizing that, and then also doing not doing it. I love the bit on failure. I thought that was super refreshing, particularly the early intervention, because I think what we've perhaps heard from others have been stories of failure where it's just been allowed to go through its course. So I thought that was really interesting. The final piece, and obviously we just spoke about it, but that access to digestible learning, I think for most people in their early stage of the career, I don't think it's been fully utilised yet. And in fact, I'd say it's been underutilised for the vast majority. I think there is a scepticism, there is outside of tech, a scepticism and a fear of it. And so there's no interaction. Whereas I was sat there talking about 10, 15 years ago, sat with a FTSE 5 FMCG business, like, what are we going to recruit for in 10 years? I have no idea, but it won't be the roles you're recruiting now. And broadly speaking, I was right. Still recruiting PMs, still recruiting BAs. I don't think they're the data scientist in the business. Certainly, we'd never worked one. They will have one of the biggest data science teams in the UK. They're in the tobacco plant. So the migration from tobacco to vaping, they have a business of a couple of thousand in Southampton of data people. So those roles will come about. But if you don't engage with it, that's where I think you'll get left behind. I couldn't agree more. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
Maz.
Awesome.
I've really enjoyed talking to you today. One of the things that I was reflecting on driving down was, it's really rare. Well, I don't think I've ever done it in my recent careers, just stop and have a look back
Good.
over the entirety of the last, what is nearly 25 years.
Yeah.
So I've found it really personally interesting and insightful.
Yeah.
So thank you. And I've really enjoyed talking to you both
I
today.
can't wait to listen back to this, because you had some real gems that when I go back and listen to them, I will probably have the time to absorb them a little bit more as a listener rather than as a, yeah, exactly. So I'm really excited to listen back to this one. Thank you, Maz.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.